Emily Wilson thought she had found excitement in the arms of her 69-year-old neighbor, Harold Pierce. But what began as a secret affair quickly spiraled into obsession, betrayal, and ultimately murder. Michael Wilson, the devoted husband, who never suspected the darkness creeping into his home, would pay the ultimate price. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a tangled web of lies and dangerous passion that turned a quiet suburban street into the scene of a chilling crime. The Wilson family lived on a quiet suburban street where every lawn was neatly trimmed, and every neighbor seemed to know one another. From the outside, their lives appeared enviable. Michael Wilson was steady, reliable, and devoted to his work as an accountant. He often left before sunrise and returned home late in the evening, tired but carrying the satisfaction of being the provider. His wife Emily was admired for her grace, her calm demeanor, and the way she always seemed to manage the children and household with ease. Together they looked like the sort of couple people aspired to be: comfortable, stable, and ordinary. Yet beneath that appearance Emily felt suffocated. Her days blurred together, defined by routines that never changed. The once vibrant marriage she shared with Michael had grown into something quiet, predictable, and hollow. Loneliness began to eat at Emily in ways she couldn't admit aloud. She longed for someone to notice her, to make her feel alive again. That longing was answered in an unlikely way when she struck up conversations with their neighbor across the street, Harold Pierce. Harold was 69 years old, a widower who had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone else. He spent his days tending to his small garden, waving to passers-by, and living quietly with memories of his late wife. Despite his age, Harold had an energy about him that drew Emily in. He noticed her in ways Michael no longer did. He complimented her when she dressed up, listened when she spoke, and carried a charm that seemed old-fashioned yet strangely intoxicating. What started as casual chats over the fence slowly deepened into something more dangerous. Emily began visiting Harold's house under the guise of neighborly kindness, bringing baked goods or asking for small favors. Each visit lingered longer than the last. She found herself laughing more, smiling more, and feeling a sense of excitement that had long been missing from her life. Harold, flattered by the attention of a younger woman, responded eagerly. He offered her warmth and conversation, but also the thrill of secrecy. He became the escape she had been craving. The affair began in silence, hidden in the spaces between Michael's long work hours. Emily would slip across the street when she knew her husband wouldn't be home, spending hours in Harold's living room, drinking wine and basking in the dangerous thrill of betrayal. For Harold, the connection quickly became an obsession. He saw Emily not only as a companion, but as a chance to feel young again, to reclaim the passion that had died with his wife. He began imagining a future with her, a life where he wouldn't have to return to an empty house each night. Emily told herself it was harmless, that she deserved to feel wanted, that no one was getting hurt. Yet deep down she knew the truth, that the secret she was weaving could unravel everything. The more she indulged in Harold's attention, the more careless she became. She told small lies to Michael about errands or visiting friends, each one stacking on the other until they formed a fragile tower of deceit. Every glance she exchanged with Harold across the street became charged with unspoken meaning. Every wave disguised a dangerous secret. As weeks turned into months, Emily began to believe she was invincible. She thought she could keep the two worlds apart, the dutiful wife at home and the passionate lover in secret. But Harold's feelings grew stronger, more demanding. He began leaving little tokens for her, gifts hidden in her mailbox or left on her doorstep when he thought no one was watching. The attention thrilled her but also unsettled her, for it hinted at something deeper than what she had intended. She had wanted an escape, not a man consumed by desire. Michael, busy and trusting, remained unaware for the time being. He believed Emily's gentle smiles, her practiced reassurances, and her carefully constructed lies. To him life was steady and unshaken. He never imagined that betrayal was blossoming just a few steps from his front door. Yet cracks had already begun to form in the foundation of their lives. Cracks Emily could no longer control. What she thought was a secret adventure was becoming something dangerous, something with consequences she hadn't dared to consider. The Wilson home, once a symbol of safety and family, had become the stage for a deception that was only growing darker. Emily believed she was in control of the game she was playing, but in truth, had set into motion a chain of events that would spin far beyond her grasp. What had begun as a restless search for passion had ignited a fire that would eventually consume them all. Emily's secret routine began to shape her entire life. She grew skilled at watching the clock, knowing exactly when Michael would leave for work and when he would return. In those windows of time, she allowed herself to slip into Harold's world. His house, though just across the street, felt like a completely different universe. The old furniture, the faint scent of pipe tobacco, and the low hum of a radio in the background created a setting far from the spotless home she shared with her husband. To Emily, it felt like an escape, a place where she wasn't a mother or a wife, but simply a woman being desired. Harold encouraged that feeling, offering compliments that Michael no longer bothered with, lingering touches that made her pulse quicken. Their meetings became reckless. Emily would sometimes leave chores unfinished just to steal an hour with Harold. The more time she spent there, the harder it became to return to her ordinary life. Each crossing of the street took a small act of betrayal that gave her both guilt and exhilaration. Harold, meanwhile, was falling deeper into his obsession. He had been alone for years, living quietly with memories of the wife he buried long ago. Now, with Emily at his side, he felt alive again. He clung to her as though she were his last chance at happiness. At first, Emily believed she could manage it all. She convinced herself that Michael's focus on work excused her choices, that her children were too young to notice, and that neighbors wouldn't suspect a thing. But Harold was not content with stolen hours and whispered meetings. His feelings began to shift into something consuming, something Emily had not anticipated. He wanted more than brief moments. He wanted permanence. He began pressing Emily for reassurances, asking when she would finally admit to Michael that she no longer loved him. She dodged these questions, offering vague promises she had no intention of keeping. For Emily, the affair was about excitement, not a future. Harold, however, interpreted her reluctance as a challenge. He started appearing in places he never had before. Emily would see him in the grocery store, though she hadn't told him she was going there. He lingered outside her children's school under the pretense of taking a walk. Sometimes late at night, she would catch the shadow of someone standing across the street, staring toward her home. She knew it was Harold, watching, waiting, unable to let her go. What had once been thrilling now carried the weight of fear. Michael, though still unaware of the full truth, began noticing subtle changes in his wife. Emily was distracted, often checking her phone with a faint smile or rushing to change her clothes before stepping out. When he asked where she was going, her answers were rehearsed but not convincing. He noticed Harold more, too. The older man seemed to be around at odd hours, always ready with a wave or a comment, always too close to Emily. At first, Michael dismissed his concerns as paranoia born of exhaustion, but the unease lingered. Neighbors began whispering as well. Small-town streets often carry secrets poorly, and people had started to notice Emily's visits to Harold's house. Though no one dared say it outright, suspicions spread quietly. Emily felt the pressure of those unseen eyes on her back whenever she crossed the street, yet she couldn't stop herself. She felt trapped in a cycle, torn between the dull security of her marriage and the intoxicating pull of her lover. Each decision she made only tightened the net around her, pulling her deeper into danger. Harold's obsession reached a new level when he began leaving gifts where Michael could almost find them. A necklace tucked into Emily's purse, a bouquet left at the side of the porch, and once even a handwritten note slipped through the door. Emily panicked, worried that Michael would discover the truth. She scolded Harold, begging him to be discreet, but he brushed off her concerns. To him, secrecy was no longer enough. He wanted Emily completely, and he was growing impatient. For Michael, the unease became too heavy to ignore. One evening he noticed Harold leaving their house while Emily stood at the doorway, her face pale and uneasy. Though nothing was said, the image stayed with him. He began paying closer attention, marking the times Emily left, the excuses she gave, the moments Harold appeared nearby. He had no proof yet, only suspicion, but deep down he sensed that his marriage was unraveling. Emily continued to balance on the edge, pretending everything was fine while knowing her world was spinning out of control. The lies grew heavier, Harold's presence more threatening, and Michael's suspicions sharper. What began as a desperate search for passion had transformed into a trap she could not escape. The affair was no longer just about stolen moments. It was about control, obsession, and the first quiet signs of something much darker that was yet to come. Michael's discovery came not in a dramatic confrontation, but in a quiet, accidental moment. Emily had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to tuck the children into bed. It buzzed with a new notification, and without intending to pry, Michael glanced down. What he saw stopped him cold. The message was from Harold, the man who lived across the street, the man he had begun to notice too often near his wife. The words were not casual or friendly. They were intimate, urgent, and deeply unsettling. Michael's chest tightened as he read the exchange, scrolling back through messages that revealed months of deception. But it was not only the betrayal of the affair that cut into him, it was the suggestion within those texts that Harold wanted Michael gone for good. Phrases like, "We can finally be free," and "your problem doesn't have to last forever," revealed a chilling undercurrent beneath the passion. Shaken, Michael set the phone back down and forced himself to breathe steadily, not letting Emily see what he had just uncovered. His mind spun with possibilities. Could his wife truly be part of such a scheme, or was she caught in something she hadn't realized was spiraling out of control? He didn't know which possibility was worse. What he did know was that Harold Pierce was dangerous. The image of the older man watching their house late at night now carried a sinister weight. Michael decided he couldn't confront Emily yet. He needed to understand more before he acted. In the days that followed, Michael quietly observed everything with a sharper eye. He noticed how often Emily slipped out for errands that never seemed to have receipts. He saw Harold loitering on the street, often walking slowly past their yard with a lingering glance. He tracked the times his wife's phone lit up and recognized patterns. The more he saw, the more he realized that Harold's fixation was not just romantic, it was predatory. Michael's love for his wife warred with the anger swelling inside him, but above all he feared what Harold might be capable of. Then came the evening that shattered everything. Michael left for his usual jog, a routine he kept faithfully 3 times a week. The neighborhood was familiar and safe, the path well worn, but when hours passed and he hadn't returned, Emily began calling friends, then neighbors, and finally the police. His body was found in a wooded area nearby, sprawled on the ground, lifeless. At first glance it appeared to be a violent robbery gone wrong, but when investigators arrived, small details disrupted that theory. His wallet was still in his pocket, his watch still on his wrist. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle. It seemed as if he had been ambushed, silenced quickly and deliberately. Emily's performance of grief began almost immediately. She wept in front of neighbors, clutched her children tightly, and spoke of Michael's kindness to anyone who would listen. But investigators are trained to see through the surface. They watched her carefully, noting her composure in moments where most spouses collapse. Something about her reaction felt rehearsed. And then came the inconsistencies. Emily told detectives she had been at home the entire evening, but phone records showed multiple calls exchanged with Harold during the exact window when Michael disappeared. Detectives turned their attention to Harold Pierce. At first, Harold claimed he had nothing to do with Michael's death. He painted himself as an old man caught in a misunderstanding, denying any involvement. But suspicion grew when neighbors reported seeing him outside that evening, pacing in front of his house and looking toward the Wilsons' home. His calm demeanor cracked when investigators pressed him about his relationship with Emily. What he tried to describe as harmless friendship was quickly disproven by the text messages retrieved from both his and Emily's phones. The messages revealed not only passion, but a disturbing undertone of planning. Harold spoke of being tired of waiting, of wanting a life where he no longer had to hide. He hinted at Michael being an obstacle, and used language that investigators interpreted as veiled threats, though Emily never directly agreed to his darker suggestions. Her failure to reject them added weight to the suspicion surrounding her. To the investigators, it seemed Harold had convinced himself that Emily would embrace freedom once Michael was gone. Forensic evidence began to close in. Soil samples on Michael's running shoes matched an area where Harold's car had been seen parked earlier that night. Traces of blood were later discovered inside Harold's trunk. Hanked but undeniable. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture not of random violence but of calculated murder. Michael had unknowingly become prey in a twisted game fueled by betrayal and obsession. As detectives pieced the story together, the neighborhood that once seemed peaceful became the center of a dark and unfolding scandal. The faithful husband had discovered his wife's secret too late, and the man who promised her passion had delivered death instead. Yet, as the case deepened, investigators were left wondering just how much Emily truly knew and whether her silence made her a victim of Harold's obsession or a partner in crime. Investigators approached the case with a sense of urgency. A man was dead, his wife's behavior was suspicious, and the neighbor across the street had already emerged as the likely suspect. Yet the details had to be unraveled. Every fact, every inconsistency, mattered. Detectives began with Emily, asking her to recount the night of Michael's disappearance again and again. Each time she told it, the story seemed rehearsed, polished in a way that raised doubts. She said she had been home, caring for the children, and only noticed something was wrong when Michael failed to return from his jog. What troubled the detectives most was her lack of genuine shock when she was told Michael had been targeted deliberately. Most spouses would be crushed, unable to fathom who could want their loved one dead. Emily, however, nodded quietly, as if the idea had already crossed her mind. Her phone records were even more telling. The flurry of messages with Harold during the hours surrounding Michael's disappearance could not be ignored. Some were deleted, but the recovery team pulled enough fragments to confirm constant communication. The tone of Harold's words was desperate, impatient, and sometimes menacing. He begged Emily for reassurance, demanded that she prove her loyalty, and wrote about a future that could only exist without Michael. While Emily never explicitly encouraged violence, her vague responses left investigators with a troubling question. Had she chosen silence because she was complicit, or because she was afraid? Harold, when brought in for questioning, tried to maintain a mask of calm. He told detectives he was nothing more than a lonely old man who enjoyed companionship. He spoke of Emily with reverence, calling her a bright light in his dark life. Yet beneath his carefully chosen words, investigators sensed the undercurrent of obsession. He denied any involvement in Michael's murder, claiming he had been at home the entire evening, but the evidence quickly chipped away at his alibi. Surveillance footage from a traffic camera placed his car leaving the neighborhood during the exact time frame of Michael's jog. When detectives confronted him with this, his composure faltered. The breakthrough came when Harold's car was searched. Investigators found a glove stuffed beneath the passenger seat. On it were traces of blood later matched to Michael. Soil embedded in the rubber of Harold's tires matched the wooded area where Michael's body had been discovered. These findings shifted the case from speculation to certainty. The old man who had once seemed harmless had, in fact, carried out a calculated murder. But the bigger mystery lingered. To what extent had Emily been involved? Neighbors were soon pulled into the investigation. Many reported having seen Emily visiting Harold's house frequently, often when Michael was at work. Some admitted they had whispered about the affair long before Michael's death. Others recalled seeing Harold acting strangely, watching the Wilson home late at night or standing on his porch long after the rest of the street had gone dark. One neighbor even described seeing Harold pacing furiously on the evening Michael disappeared, muttering to himself. Each piece of testimony built a portrait of Harold as a man consumed by obsession. Yet Emily's presence in his life was undeniable. Emily was questioned again, this time with evidence laid out in front of her. She admitted to the affair, tears rolling down her cheeks, as she confessed to being swept up in Harold's attention. She insisted, however, that she had never asked Harold to hurt her husband. She described herself as trapped, too afraid to end the relationship, fearful of how Harold might react if she pulled away. Detectives listened carefully, weighing her words against the messages they had already recovered. Her silence in the face of Harold's threats painted her as a woman complicit through omission. But proving she had agreed to Michael's murder was far more difficult. Forensic teams scoured Harold's home. They discovered journals filled with rambling entries about Emily, fantasies of a life together and declarations of love that bordered on delusion. In one entry, Harold wrote about Michael in chilling terms, referring to him as the barrier, and describing how freedom was close at hand. Another entry dated just 2 days before Michael's death spoke of a plan to take action, to finally make Emily his. These writings became key evidence, showing not only intent but the obsessive mindset that had driven him. As the trial loomed, prosecutors prepared a case centered on Harold's obsession and his deliberate act of murder. Emily's role was murkier. While she was not charged as an accomplice, her reputation was destroyed. The courtroom became a stage where her affair was dissected publicly, where her private messages were read aloud, and where the community judged her as harshly as the law judged Harold. The defense tried to argue that Harold had acted out of unrequited love, that Emily had never truly reciprocated his feelings, but the sheer weight of evidence left little doubt about his guilt. Harold's image as a lonely widower shattered. He was revealed as a predator who manipulated and pursued a married woman until his obsession turned deadly. For Emily, the punishment came in another form. She was left to face the anger of her children, the whispers of neighbors, and the weight of knowing her actions had set into motion a tragedy that could never be undone. The quiet suburban street that had once seemed so ordinary now carried the stain of betrayal and murder. Every window that had once looked out onto safe lawns and friendly waves now hid people who wondered how well they truly knew their neighbors. Michael's death was no longer just a personal tragedy, it became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly secrets and obsessions could turn into violence. The trial unfolded like a storm, pulling everyone connected to the Wilson family into its relentless path. In the courtroom, the facade of ordinary suburban life was stripped away and replaced with a story of betrayal, obsession, and violence that gripped the entire community. Reporters filled the benches, neighbors whispered from the gallery, and every detail of the affair and the murder was laid bare under the harsh lights of justice. Michael's absence loomed over the proceedings, his name invoked again and again as the victim of a plan that had spiraled out of control. Prosecutors wasted no time in laying out the evidence against Harold Pierce. They described him not as a lonely old man, but as a calculating predator who had deliberately inserted himself into the life of a vulnerable woman. They presented the blood-stained glove, the soil found on his tires, and the damning phone records that placed him at the scene of the crime. They showed the jury Harold's journals, filled with disturbing declarations of love for Emily and chilling words about eliminating the barrier that stood between them and their future. Each page turned the courtroom colder, painting Harold as a man consumed by obsession and willing to kill to fulfill his delusion. The defense tried to craft another picture. They argued that Harold was fragile, grieving and clinging to life through the companionship Emily had given him. They insisted he had acted in a moment of desperation rather than through careful planning. They tried to shift some of the blame onto Emily, suggesting she had led him on, fed his fantasy and used his affection while never intending to commit to him. But the weight of physical evidence and the clarity of Harold's own words in his journals destroyed their case. The image of a harmless widower dissolved in the face of hard facts, leaving behind the undeniable truth of murder. Emily, though never charged with conspiracy, became an unwilling centerpiece of the trial. The prosecution made it clear that she had not planned Michael's murder, but they revealed her affair in painstaking detail, forcing her to sit in silence as her messages to Harold were read aloud. The words, once whispered in secrecy, now echoed in a room filled with strangers. The community she had lived in for years saw her as the woman who had betrayed her husband, who had entangled herself in a dangerous affair that led to his death. The humiliation was complete. Her children, seated quietly with relatives, heard truths no child should have to bear. Every glance in her direction carried judgment, not from the court, but from the society that had once accepted her as a neighbor, a friend, a mother. The jury's deliberation was swift. With overwhelming evidence and no reasonable doubt, Harold Pierce was found guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence was harsh but expected: life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the verdict was read, Harold sat motionless, his eyes fixed on Emily. Even in that moment of finality, his gaze held a strange intensity, as if he still believed she was worth the destruction he had brought upon himself. Emily refused to look back at him. For her, the affair had been a dangerous escape, but the reality it had produced was a nightmare she could never undo. When the trial ended, Emily returned to a home that no longer felt like hers. The Wilson house, once alive with the sound of family, was now filled with silence and shadows. Every corner reminded her of Michael, of the life she had betrayed, and of the children who looked at her with questions she could not answer. She was not imprisoned like Harold, but she lived in a cage of her own making. The whispers of neighbors followed her everywhere. Parents at school avoided her. Friends vanished, and her world shrank to the four walls of her house. She had gained nothing, and lost everything. Michael's family demanded answers from her, but Emily had none to give. She claimed she never wanted Harold to harm her husband, that she never believed he would go that far. Yet the silence she had kept in the face of Harold's threats weighed on her like a confession. She might not have struck the fatal blow, but she had opened the door to the man who did. That truth became her punishment, one she carried every day as she raised children who would forever remember the scandal surrounding their father's death. Harold's life behind bars became the grim end to his delusion. Once consumed by fantasies of love and passion, he was reduced to a prisoner marked by his crime. The obsession that had once made him feel alive became the very reason for his isolation and downfall. No letters came from Emily. No visits, no whispered promises. His world shrank to the size of his cell, and the future he imagined vanished into cold reality. The case left the neighborhood scarred. The street that once seemed idyllic now carried the memory of betrayal and bloodshed. People locked their doors more tightly, trusted their neighbors less, and remembered Michael as the man whose loyalty had been repaid with deceit and violence. His absence remained a wound that time could not easily heal. Emily's story became a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones, a reminder that secrets never remain hidden forever, and that desire, once unleashed, can destroy far more than a marriage. The tragedy of the Wilson family was not just the loss of a husband and father, but the shattering of an illusion. The revelation that darkness can live just across the street, waiting for the chance to step inside.